Clef was running faster than he'd run in a very long while. He could still feel her back there, floating somewhere. He risked a glance backward, watching the floors buckle into water and piss and dirt and air. He hoped she would be off balance enough for medications that she would be less capable, less able to affect the environmental changes in the universe. He was pretty sure it was the pointless type now. Hope now. He rounded the corner, and the walls slid into chunks of burning babies, the smell of human flesh burning his stomach slightly, then making it growl uncomfortably. One more turn, and he'd be at ground zero. Another 10 feet, 9, 8, 7. He burst through the doors, looking expectantly for 343 to be standing in position. Laura was waiting next to the large mirror as Clef pounded through the doors, panting. He looked at her, incredulous. "The fuck are you still doing here?" "You guys never work alone, right? I'm here to help." "I'm not alone," screamed Clef, as the doors behind him became a series of kittens with Barbie doll arms sticking out of their eyes. "Where's 343? The doors opened slowly. Being floated through them. Didn't look like it was now or ever been a little girl. Years of atrophy had turned her limbs into spindly wires of flesh wrapped around bone. She wasn't even able to lift them or turn her head. The tubes that hung out of her arms were now crawling over her body like centipedes. The walls of kittens began to mew, plaintively. She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but only a gurgle came out. She looked at Clef and gurgled again. Louder. Angrily. Her bowels began to empty black, blood-smelling feces onto the floor, which in turn morphed into coals and began to spread out slowly, burningly. Clef was preparing to make a mad dash when the floor's progression slowed and stopped. He blinked twice and looked around the room. 343 was standing just behind Laura, his face knit in concentration. The old man's nose had a drop of blood forming from the left nostril, slowly running down over the crest of his lip and dripping onto his shirt. 343 flinched. "If you're gonna do something, Doctor." Clef raised the gun again, clicking the hammer back. Let it fall. The gun popped slightly, bars of energetic power running through its metal surface. "Fuck!" screamed Clef. "A goddamn recharge rate!" The girl screamed in rage, and 343 cried out, staggered by the changes that she was forcing into the world. The drugs in her system were slowly dissipating. Her control over the world were returning. Clef grabbed Laura and pushed her hard, leaving her tottering towards the wall on the opposite side of the room as he madly dashed for the opposite side. The floating woman turned the air into chlorine for a moment. Just a moment. Before 343 could stop her. A child in an adult body. Broken and beaten over the course of a decade, lashing out with her shattered mind. The older SCP was leaning on the floor, ears bleeding. His knotted hands were clenched and his foe turned for a moment from Clef to float towards him. It was almost beautiful to watch, Clef thought, stopping for an instant to observe what he hoped was a rare circumstance of the distance between them. Crackled as the hovering female changed things, reversing the laws of physics and existence of 343 set them back into place. It was like watching a petulant child throw her toys to the floor and watching her patient grandfather picking them back up and setting them right. Clef edged around near the now dead kitten door, raising the revolver again. He fired, the fatal report running up his arm, and chunks of the hovering menace were ripped from her body and thrown behind her into the mirror. She screamed as a cancer started to form almost insistently under her flesh. "Don't care much for that, do you, little girl?" shouted Clef, as 343 suddenly locked the universal order back into place. Clef dropped the gun, and Ball rushed her before she could recover, hitting her tiny midsection sharply and pushing her toward the mirror, grasping the red disc and shoving. They fell into a strange field with rolling wheat and smells of emptiness. The girl was rolling on the ground, pitifully wheeling herself up off the ground. Clef stood nearby, knocking the bits of wheat and grass over his armor. He waddled over and forced her body over, straddling her small, heaving chest. "Sorry, dearie." he said, smirking. Different world, different rules. He placed both her hands around her neck and brought his thumbs to her trachea. Tears ran down her face, her quivering lips pleading wordlessly with him to reconsider, as the brittle, malnourished bones snapped. Her eyes thankfully glossed in the pleasant emptiness of oblivion. Clef stood and walked back towards the mirror. Should have done that years ago. Clef stepped back through the mirror, unlocking the telekill body armor he was wearing and dropping it to the floor. 343 leaned against the wall nearby, being tended to by Lore. Clef watched as she dabbed the blood away from the old man's eyes before he cleared his throat. Lore looked up, smiled, and ran to the mirror's edge. 239 status? Eliminated, said Clef. Good, said Lore. She brought the gun only as far as Clef's midsection before she fired. Clef felt parts of him tear out of his back and staggered backwards in the frame of the mirror. He looked up at Lore, the smiling face holding the violet pistol, feeling a tugging sense of recognition. Jack? Lore smiled, eyes twinkling with mischief. Well, of course, Alto. Who else? Clef was sagging now, his legs giving out as the internal and external bleeding set in. Dr. Bright jiggled happily as she sneered down at the bleeding middle-aged man lying on the floor. I don't take kindly to people who try to kill me, Clef, regardless of the circumstances. Especially. Really, Jack? But they were good circumstances. Not even friends? Asked Clef. What's a little murder between friends? Especially not friends. That's too bad, Jack, said Clef, throwing up parts of his stomach. You look good enough to fuck. Clef rolled over, struggling to stand up. Brett let him, if for no other reason than it made the blood pour out of his gaping body that much faster. You forgot one thing, though, Jack, said Clef, feeling his muscles twisting around the cancers forming in his midsection. What's that, Alto? Your jewelry. Clef stood in front of the mirror, smiling bloodily as he held SCP-963 at arm's length in his gloved hand. Goodbye, Jack. As Clef lurched backward toward the mirror, Bright brought the pistol up for a second time, pulling the trigger. The gun popped, electrical arcs running up and down the arm's length. Bright screamed and rushed towards the mirror. But as she did, a loud shot, gunpowder and copper echoed through the room, striking the disc covering at the center of the glass. As Bright reached the mirror, she saw the disc chip ever so slightly and ceased glowing. She whirled around looking for the source of the shot, raising the pistol over her head in rage. She found no one. The room was cold as Schmetterling walked down the hall, shouldering the sniper rifle. It had been a while since he'd done any shooting. He'd proud he still had the touch. He walked methodically towards the frozen tube, entered the old password they hadn't thought to delete, and smelled boldly as a mantis fell bodily to the floor. He leaned down and slapped his face a few times. A mantis! A mantis! Wowza. Schmetterling sighed and picked at the larger man, resting him on his shoulder. He left the rifle behind and stopped as he passed Dr. Kondraki's tube, looking at the frozen visage. Come on, he said. I'm gonna need all of you to help me cover our escape. The tube shimmered and the butterflies flopped away from the empty containment chamber, floating around Schmetterling and his rescued friend for a moment before both vanished. Dr. Bright sat in the director's office, tapping her polished nails against the desk. This would be a setback. The amount of time needed to repair SCP-093 was unknown, if it could be repaired at all, and the disappearance of Kondraki from containment was highly unsettling. Bright stood and walked towards the wall, entering the long and complex code required for someone without stable voice recognition or handprint. The door slid open, revealing a carefully crafted box. She opened it, revealing an almost circle with the 3 inward pointing arrows. Only a setback, Alto, thought Jack. Only a setback. Alto clefs heavily in a field of wheat and emptiness. He could feel the effects of having a Higgs boson thrown through his midsection. He knew that it didn't have too much longer to live, and what time he did have would be unpleasant. If he'd still had a gun, he might have shot himself, but since he didn't, Clef looked at the amulet. Tilting his head back, he positioned it perfectly over his mouth and dropped it down his throat, thinking in his last moments how much nicer oblivion would be than the perpetual, eternally cold dreams. And somewhere on the other side of our world's mirrors, a cancer-ridden, bleeding body shuts down and reawakens, screaming.